Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on the future of destination marketing and management. My name is Chris Fair. I'm the president of Residence Consultancy, and it's my pleasure to spend a next 45 minutes to an hour with you and talk a little bit about one of our most popular presentations. I've given this presentation this year in a couple of different conferences. First, earlier this winter in Poland at the European Cities Summit, and then again this summer in Montreal at the Destination International Conference. So if you were in either of those presentations, some of this material is going to look familiar to you. I wanted to especially welcome those of you that are coming to us from very far afield. We have participants today from virtually just about every continent, I think, other than Antarctica, of course. So a big shout out to those of you in Australia and New Zealand where it's 8:30 in the morning, and especially to our friends in Israel where it's quite late at night. So thank you for taking the time to join us. It's always difficult to find a time to do these things that suit all of the various time zones that we're dealing with. And of course we have many people here in North America, whether you're in Newport Beach or in New York or back home where I live in Vancouver. Thanks for being with us today. Our firm, Residence Consultancy, is a global advisor that specializes really in three areas: real estate, tourism, and economic development. And I think that our work in these three different areas that are seemingly maybe not directly related has really informed our opinion and approach to the future of destination marketing, which is specifically largely, when we talk about destination marketing, is very tourism focused. But our view is that the relationship between attraction for real estate, visitors and talent and companies and investment, these are worlds where the factors that attract one seem to attract the other, and our approach is really informed by that perspective. Our work is really in four particular areas. We focus around place strategy, working with different cities, destinations, regions, countries, on tourism master plans or destination development strategies in terms of looking at their city or region in terms of how to attract more talent and investment. And of course, in a tourism master plan, we're really focused on the relationship in terms of attracting visitors, but also in thinking about how that impacts and hopefully enhances quality of life for local residents. A big part of our practice is around place branding, in terms of actually defining positioning and identities, whether that's for tourism, economic development, or real estate. And then place marketing, of course, we're all familiar with in terms of engaging audiences to attract visitors, talent, or investment, or potentially buyers to an urban neighborhood. And the last piece is a bit unusual, but it's actually going to be a function, and I'll talk a little bit in the presentation today, which is placemaking, of thinking about how to leverage art, culture, experiential retail, to improve and optimize public places, not just to enhance social cohesion and community pride, but to actually enhance the economic performance of neighborhoods, main streets, or developments. Some of the recent projects in the perspective that we bring, and I'll talk in reference today, are our work with cities like Vancouver, producing a tourism master plan, cities like Cincinnati, or Caribbean countries like Aruba. We've done work with the Republic of Ireland and helping them develop a regional brand strategy for the south and east of the country. A particularly interesting project we just finished was with the city of Tulsa in Oklahoma, where we worked with the Chamber of Commerce to provide and create a destination development strategy that really looked at the city from not just tourism, but also as a place to live and as a place to work, and what were the intersection of actions that would lead to attracting more talent, tourism, and investment to the city. We're currently working with the city of Portland on a tourism master plan. We've been working for several years using our approach to benchmarking the experiential quality of destinations with Bermuda. Some of the real estate projects that we're involved in include a major urban revitalization of the eastern part of downtown Calgary. And then we work in many resort projects on creating new destinations such as Costa Palmas in Los Cabos, Mexico. So our agenda today is really kind of give a little bit of an overview of what we see happening at a macro level in terms of key trends that are driving the growth of tourism, some of the threats to those trends, and then diving into what I call the meaning of life for a destination marketing organization. And that really will lead into some discussion about the path to becoming DMMO, which is a destination marketing and management organization. For some of you that are joining us that are from a real estate perspective, I think you'll find both the trends and the threats particularly relevant to your industry as well, and some of the practices of what we believe where destination marketing is going, whether it's for tourism, talent attraction, or from attracting residential buyers or residents. These are all going to be relevant to you as well. Throughout the process, there's a little window at the side of your screen that has a question mark. If you want to submit a question, please do that through the course of the presentation, and we'll try and save about 10-15 minutes towards the end of our hour together, and I'll be able to go through those, and you'll also be able to submit questions then. But please feel free to get those in the queue, and as you have questions as we go along, pop those in there. I'll address them if I can as we go or at the end of the presentation. If you want to follow along on Twitter or share any of the information on Twitter as we go, my Twitter handle is @strfair, and we're using the hashtag DMMO for this presentation and as we talk about destination management. So I think we all are probably aware, as being in the business that we're in, that tourism is one of the world's fastest growing industries. And that won't come as a surprise to anyone. You should be probably familiar with this UNWTO chart and graphic that really projects the growth, expected growth, and this is just international tourist arrivals. So this is people crossing the border from one country to another. There's a quote that I've heard that has really resonated with me that said, really up to this point, to get to this 940 million, we actually, in 2010 when this forecast was created, in 2011 we crossed the 1 billion mark, that it took us really 10,000 years to get to 1 billion international travelers, people crossing international boundaries in a particular year. And when you look at this forecast, you know, that forecast is to double between 2010 to 2030. So it will, in the space of 20 years, we'll accomplish what it took us 10,000 years to get to in terms of international travel. And when you think about where we are right now, and we're in the midst of this exponential growth. So we're in 2017. So we're actually experiencing this right now. There's this rising tide that's really lifting all boats across the tourism industry. However, while tourists come from everywhere, they don't necessarily go everywhere. And that's what we'll largely be talking about today, as some of the issues and implications around the concentration of visitors to particular resorts, neighborhoods, cities, or regions. But the future, we think, looks quite different than the past. So while you see this exponential growth, we can't just project more of the same. It's going to be more, but we think it's going to be something different. So why is that? Well, a few key trends that I'll touch on that we think are driving the growth of tourism in a slightly different direction. First and foremost is what we call conspicuous leisure. Now, this is a term that was actually coined by Thomas Veblen back in the 1890s, an economist, and he wrote a book called The Theory of the Leisure Class. And he's first coined a term that you're quite familiar with, which is conspicuous consumption. And that's the articulation of status through the purchase and display of material goods. But of course, in 1890, there weren't that many material goods to display. So he actually talked first about conspicuous leisure. And that was articulating your status through the experiences and what you did with your leisure time. This chart on the screen here is from our survey of the wealthiest 1% of travelers in the US. And we've been tracking this since 2008, asking them, what are, of 30 different goods, services, experiences, everything from sending your kids to private school, to buying a fancy car, to living in a gated community, what are the most desirable goods, services, and experiences in your life? And interestingly, smartphone, when we started this survey in 2008, was just after the iPhone had come out. Most of us were still on Blackberries, or didn't even maybe have flip phones. So now smartphone has worked its way up to the top of the list. Of course, we probably wouldn't consider that a luxury today, more of a necessity, and that probably reflects its position at the top of the list. But when you look down this list, you start to see some of these other things that are desirable for the wealthiest. It's freedom to work from home, vacation home in the mountains and beach. It's extended time off work, taking exotic vacations. And look at what's at the bottom of this list. And of course, this list goes on, but it's fine jewelry and or expensive watch. And right above that, owning an expensive car. So what we're seeing is this shift out of articulating status and enjoying wealth based on the goods that we buy into how we spend our time, who we spend it with. And that's why you see this freedom to work from home, vacation home in the mountains and the beach, and extended time off work and vacations is really at the top of the aspirations for the people that can afford to buy or do anything. One of the other key trends that's, if you picked up on that chart about the UNWTO growth, was the amount of growth that's happening in Asia. So Chinese outbound travel has been growing rapidly. It crossed over 100 million a couple of years ago in 2014. And by 2020, in a space of 6 years alone, it's expected will go from 100 million to 200 million outbound trips. And so this, again, is one of the things that we're in the midst of this massive change. A lot of this outbound travel is happening within Hong Kong, Macau, the immediate region around China, but this is really a tidal wave of travelers that is going to start to be felt and further afield. You can see it today. Just try and go to the Louvre in Paris during the summer months, and you'll be astonished that probably 90% of the travelers might be from China on any particular day. And so this will be something that we'll see spread around the world to destinations of all kinds in time as these travelers become more experienced and move further and further afield. Another key trend that's changing the future of travel and tourism is our demographics. This just highlights a few countries of looking at what percentage of the population is age 65 or more. In Germany, it's already over 20%. In the United Kingdom, it's approaching that. It's around 17%. So we're seeing this growth. The population, we all know, in countries at varying rates is getting older. And why is that important? Well, this is based on a survey we did in 2015 of retired travelers, those travelers over the age of 65. And what I think was interesting here is we asked them a number of different ways of how do you define retirement. And they said, first and foremost, they defined retirement as a time to travel and explore new places. So that to me shows that we should start to see this retirees, and we saw that the younger people that were 55 to 65, they forecast that they defined retirement even more so as a time to travel and explore new places. So we can see this older generation, but because they're older, they're likely to travel in potentially different ways than they did in the past. So that can also be what might make the future look a little bit different than the past. Another trend is what we call localism. And you think about localism really is a counter trend to what we're all familiar with, which is globalization. So the growth of globalization, the proliferation of brands means that I can go to Singapore, I can go to London, and they'll all have a Coach store or a Tiffany store, and with the exact same merchandise that I might find at home in Vancouver or New York. So the counter trend then is to look for goods of local provenance, more local, unique experiences. And this particular graphic that I have on the screen is just one example of how localism is manifesting itself in the US, where you see that the macro share in terms of the amount of the market controlled by the main breweries has gone from 95% down to 75%. Imports have eaten into a share of that, but where's the real fast growth happening? It's the red line in terms of craft breweries who are expressions of local place and provenance. And craft breweries actually last year crossed 10% of the total US beer market. So we think that's just one example of this trend and this desire amongst consumers around the world towards more local experiences and goods. Another trend that's much talked about that we're all familiar with is the sharing economy. This just charts out the growth in Airbnb listings. So this is again changing the way that we travel and experience destinations. Another trend is air route development. So how is all of this international travel going to happen? Well, to get to other countries, a lot of us are going to do that by flying on planes. So this just charts out and shows you the air travel passenger growth in total kilometers flown around the world has gone from just over 5.5 billion in 2013 to it was over 6.5 billion in 2015. So a billion more air miles flown just in 2 years alone. So this is allowing, what's this allowing? It's allowing customers to move further and further afield. So these trends are driving, interestingly enough, a disproportionate number of travelers to cities. So again, I said the future doesn't look like more of the same. It looks like more but different. City trips actually soared 82% between 2007 and 2014 to reach 22% of all holidays. We'll look to get new data on this shortly, but we expect it's more than 25% now. So travel and tourism is growing overall, but cities are getting a bigger share of a bigger pie. So why cities and this interest in cities? I think there's a number of reasons. First and foremost, it comes down to the safety of cities. This picture on the screen is from Times Square in 1983. Here's what Times Square looked like 30 years later in 2013. You know, dramatically different experience. You can see a family, their kids in the foreground. Obviously, this type of experience wasn't happening in this place in 1983. Why is that? We think there's a direct correlation between the growth of tourism in New York and the declining crime rate. So the red line here shows you the decline in crime, and then you see the rise in total visitors, which are now over 60 million. The other thing that's why cities, well, we talked about changing demographics and the population getting older, and guess what? When we ask these retirees what types of future vacations they're planning, their number one type of vacation is a visit to a major metropolitan city. So retiree travelers, older travelers, are much more interested in urban experiences and the culture they can afford than going to the beach, which you see further down the list. Are most interested in cities. So, but it's not all smooth sailing. There's potential threats to tourism growth. They can be environmental. You know, this is a picture of Tiananmen Square a few years ago. Sorry, just a bit of a technical delay there. Hope you can all hear me all right. This here shows what happened in Beijing in terms of the growth in pollution, which is our red line, and then how visits, as pollution started to pick up, how visits to the city started to decline. Of course, terrorism and different events, we've seen a lot of this in seems to be a growing phenomenon, you know, as recently as last week in Las Vegas, or, you know, different acts of violence. The data we have here shows the effect in Istanbul, political instability, terrorist attack at the airport, and we can see what was a rapidly growing tourism destination, how visits, you know, fell off immediately in light of those. So in terms of safety, these can be perhaps might not have a long-term effect, we'll see, but certainly they have an immediate short-term effect. Another trend we talk a lot about is what I call peak globalization, and I think this was really reflected in the Brexit vote in the UK, perhaps by the election of Donald Trump as well, where we're starting to see a rhetoric around less porous borders, more insulated, less trade, more barriers, and that will mean potential barriers to the flow of all that international travel that we're talking about. But the single biggest threat to the future growth of tourism and the success of tourism as an industry is, whether you're in real estate development, whether you're in tourism or economic development or planning, is simply too many tourists. That this growth in tourism and this exponential growth of it, not managed strategically, if just left organically, can be a threat to the very experience that made these cities, resorts, or places attractive in the first place. Paul, we met at the Destination International Conference. He heads up the Destination Next study that I've worked on with as part of the Destination International Conference, and he said what you're seeing now is that many destinations are literally bursting at the seams. And this is certainly reflected in places like Barcelona, where we've seen actual protests against tourism in the city. Going to visit Barcelona and spend some time with the city to discuss this problem in November. I was just in Tel Aviv at the City Summit, and we had a panel with the CEOs of Barcelona, Amsterdam, and Berlin all talking about the implications of the rapid rise and growth in tourism and how that is beginning to have a perceived negative impact on quality of life for local residents. Interestingly, here in the United States, a lot of our conversations about the tourism problem or growth of tourism have been with smaller cities, Asheville, Savannah, Sonoma. These are towns that are relatively small, where the growth of tourism is being felt much more immediately, it seems, in these small towns. So this is a quote, as a futurist, this is science fiction writer William Gibson wrote this many years ago, but I think it's very appropriate today. And he said, the future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed. So while many of us might like to have, or think we'd like to have, Amsterdam's problem of having too many tourists, I think it's a fair reflection that someday many, many more destinations are going to be talking about this issue of what do we do to manage the growth of tourism to our destination, rather than what we've been fixated as an industry for decades has really been about growth. It's been about more visitors, more room nights, more meetings and conventions, more average daily expenditure, more hotel occupancy. Now, that conversation is being turned around where it's about maybe we need to do or have less but better. So my view is that these goals that DMOs have historically pursued in terms of these quantitative measures now threaten their very future and even perhaps their existence within cities, regions, or countries. So what I want to talk today is kind of my three kind of takeaways and about the process towards how do we deal with or manage these, what I would call symptoms of success. So the meaning of life for a destination marketing organization, I believe, is that first and foremost, that as tourism continues to grow, we have to start to think about shifting resources from marketing to getting more visitors to management of the destination in order to balance the interests and benefits of tourism for not just the industry, but also for the local communities that destination marketing organizations should be serving. The second key point is that I think as locals, visitors, and these digital channels, we've all seen the influence that social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or otherwise, are having on how visitors consider choosing a vacation destination, that now the primary means of place-based communication is shifting from traditional marketing like print advertising, radio, or direct mailings, etc., to now promoting your destination through the creation of places and experiences that people will share on these social media channels. And third, and this is my personal view, that is an idea that I'm advancing, is that I think actually as we think about the experiential quality of a destination, whether you're on the North Shore of Kauai or you're in Midtown Manhattan, that a destination marketing organization may be the only organization within a city or a region or a county structure that has the capabilities, capacities, and funding to actually focus on developing and managing the experiential quality of a city or a region. And I think this is because that largely, if you look at city or county administrations, are dealing with managing essential services, whether that's fire, safety, waste collection management, etc., zoning regulations, that the last thing a city or a region really thinks about is the marketing or the management of the experiential quality of the place. And as destination marketing professionals, we're the most versed and have the most capacity in terms of being able to think about curating, managing the experiential quality of the places that you represent. This is a definition of what is destination management. This is from the UNWTO. They say that destination management organizations coordinate the management of all the elements that make up a destination. It takes a strategic approach to link up very separate entities for the better management of the destination. So this is the role as a DMO that you play in terms of being able to be the ones that create those linkages between the various entities that can help enhance and improve the quality of life and experience of the destination. So talk through now just sort of the path to becoming a DMO of these steps that we see first and foremost starts with step one in terms of being able to benchmark the experiential quality of your destination. And I'm going to spend the most time talking about this because I think that if you can't do this, you really can't do the rest of these different steps that I'm going to walk you through. So let's talk about how do you benchmark and assess the experiential quality of a destination. That's been a fundamental question that for years we could do visitor intercept surveys and we could ask people what their opinions were of the experience that they've had, whether it was within our resort, a community, a hotel, or an entire city, or perhaps on a region. But the larger that geography got, the more difficult it was to be able to do that. You could only reach and touch so many visitors at one particular time. And the other shortcoming with that was that we weren't able to really benchmark and say, well, how much better are we doing than our competitors, unless you were prepared to invest and do that visitor intercept survey on the ground in many different places at the same time. So what we realized at Resonance in our work on various plans, first in Ireland, then in Vancouver, and now we've done this in Portland, Cincinnati, and other places, is that social media actually provides us, is not just a marketing channel, it actually provides us a new source of business intelligence, that we can take all of these ratings and reviews and analyze them and organize them to be able to benchmark and understand what is the experiential quality from one city to the next. To date, we've analyzed more than 400 different cities. We've also done this for ski resorts. We've done this for neighborhoods, many different levels. We've done it for entire countries. But most of our work, and I'm going to talk today, is specific examples around cities. So you can see examples of, if you take all the data in TripAdvisor and Yelp and different categories and just said which cities, and we've done this in Europe and globally as well, that this is the US data, which cities or destinations have the greatest number of very good or excellent rated experiences, whether it's hotels, restaurants, nightlife, shopping, attractions. This is the list that you would get. Not surprised that the largest cities would really be at the top of the list. And then, of course, you have major regions, like someplace like Orange County actually has more very good or excellent rated experiences than a city like San Francisco. Then it's interesting, then if you look at it, and we can also look at it to analyze it by category. You can think about it, and you could just take all the data around culture and analyze, well, what are those cultural experiences? Well, it's museums, it's concerts and shows, it's arts and events. And then you start to see a very different, somewhat different list. Of course, New York, Chicago near the top of the list. But interesting, when you just take those parameters, a city like Branson, Missouri comes out at number 5 ahead of San Francisco because they have so many concerts and shows. That data is reflected here in the gross numbers in terms of quality cultural experiences. Of course, the definition of culture might be different there than it is in New York. But you also see, interesting, like a city like Charleston, South Carolina, coming in at 20th. So that's a real competitive advantage for a city of that size to be offering that many cultural experiences. You can look at it in slice data and look at entertainment. And this is just looking at shopping, nightlife, amusement parks, zoos and aquariums, casinos and gambling, fun and games. All of these different amusements and entertainments aggregated together. And then you start to see, well, here are the cities that offer the greatest number of experiences. And of course, these rankings reflect the aggregate. It's more interesting as you slice it into the individual segments to look at and be able to tease out what are some of the true experiential definitions of the destination. Sightseeing, you look at sites and landmarks, nature and parks, tours and activities, we could group those together. And we see that, well, in this regard, New York is number 1, but then you look at the Hawaiian Islands, actually, this is where they really excel in terms of the number of sites, landmarks, and outdoor experiences that they offer. Sports as an adventure is another way you can aggregate and look at this data to understand, is that a strength or a weakness for your destination? Here we look at TripAdvisor at outdoor activities, boat tours and water sports, and not surprisingly that again the Hawaiian Islands would feature at the top of this list. And then you have an interesting city or region really like Destin in Florida at number 5. So that's a real competitive advantage where they excel and should be building their positioning around that. Culinary, you can look at it from terms of food and drink experiences and restaurants. These are the best cities for culinary experiences in the United States. And then you can also look at lodging, critical to any tourism industry. Here we're just looking at the number of very good or excellent hotels from one region to the next. So this is a particular strength of a place like Orlando, and interestingly to see a city like Houston where there's been a lot of hotel development, come in number 2. So the whole point in all of that is those are just telling you the gross absolute experiences, and I think that's essential as you think about understanding your destination and in terms of how you should be positioning it from a marketing perspective. But then in terms of from a destination management approach, we like to do destination assessments where we then look and say, well, how many of these very good or excellent experiences are you offering per 100,000 visitors? So we can index these results to be able to see what is the relative balance between supply and demand in each of these experiential areas within your destination. So the more green you see in these radar charts, the stronger that city performs against all other destinations in terms of the number of experiences it offers in that particular area per 100,000 visitors. So not surprising that you would see a city like New York be very strong from a cultural and an entertainment and a sightseeing perspective. Not as strong in sports and adventure. That's not really part of the New York proposition. And maybe one of the potential weaknesses is a bit in the lodging side. It's lagging some of competitive against some other cities. And that's why we're seeing tremendous amount of new hotel development is really in the next few years coming online in New York will likely fill in that gap. Versus here's a city that we're working with that I think is really does an excellent job all around in terms of the balance between the number of very good and excellent experiences per 100,000 visitors offered in each of these categories. This is Portland, Oregon is a very well-rounded destination that it's offering a high number of experiences per visitor in each one of these areas. The challenge is, as we're working on a tourism master plan for Portland, is saying, okay, well, how do we maintain that? How do we grow in terms of numbers and economic value of the tourism industry and maintain this picture where supply and demand are in balance? That's really the goal of any good tourism master plan. Now, Denver is looking at, here's a particular city, Denver, fairly well-rounded. Probably its weakest area is in the lodging area. Just another example, and again, I'm not showing you we could organize this data by state, so if you wanted to see Colorado versus Utah versus another, we could put that together. This is really organized around individual urban destinations or counties. Obviously, the Hawaiian Islands reflect more than one particular city. This is Austin, so you can start to see, again, some of the different experiential strengths and weaknesses of Austin, a destination that's quite popular, fairly well-rounded. If it had any two areas that it should focus on, it's really in the culture or in the sightseeing arenas. Now you look at something like Philadelphia. Well, if I was looking at their positioning here, very strong from a culinary perspective, very strong from a culture, entertainment, sightseeing, maybe sports and adventure is important to the destination. What's its real weakness? It's really around the lodging product that's being offered there. Houston, now you get it exactly the opposite, very strong from a culinary perspective, very strong from a lodging perspective. What's its weakness really around the sightseeing experience and looking at culture and entertainment are areas that we'd be looking to improve. San Diego, again, now here's a city that's great beaches, great outdoor parks, activities, recreation, so its greatest strength is actually in sports and adventure, and experientially its weaknesses in culture. Seattle, another destination, quite well-rounded, a bit lacking on the lodging side. Charlotte, again, an opposite, where you see strengths in lodging, culinary, not so much in culture or sightseeing. Cincinnati, really strong in culture. Its weakness, for anybody that's in Cincinnati, is lodging, largely reflected by their headquarter hotel and their conference center. Asheville, here's a smaller town where you get different experience. So I'm just showing you many different, here's a few European ones as examples of how this works around the world. Amsterdam really actually does do very well in sports and adventure in terms of outdoor activities. Its actually shortcoming is around culinary. Then you have a city like Ireland that we've worked with in very strong in culture, entertainment, sightseeing, sports and adventure. Weakness, lodging, and that's why we're seeing a lot of hotel development there now. Paris, an interesting one. This is one where I think for all the talk about Barcelona or Amsterdam, actually what our data shows us is that the supply demand is most out of balance in a place like Paris because it has so many visitors relative to the number of experiences that it offers. So for us, this is a bit of a warning sign that they need to do more work around the experience management of the destination. Here's Istanbul. You see a very different picture. Barcelona, a city that is much maligned for having too many tourists, actually benchmarks pretty well. So this raises for us the question about, is this really a supply side problem, or is there a perception problem about too many tourists in Barcelona, or are tourism arrivals too concentrated within particular parts of the city, and we need to develop a strategy about how to disperse some of that impact. So that's a long presentation on that particular first stage, but I think it's really important because it's this shift from marketing to management, in our view, has to begin with assessing the experiential quality of your destination. You have all the metrics around economic impact, around visitation, spending, etc., and those are all critically important to communicating the value of tourism, but understanding the impact it has on your city or your destination from an experiential perspective is critically important if you're going to move into the destination management space. So here's our little chart again. We talked about assessment. Really the next step then is moving into planning, and that's building a shared vision between industry, government, and community for the type of destination you want to be and the audiences you seek to attract. Vancouver is a city that we did a tourism master plan for 4 years ago, and a fantastic city, well known for its quality of place. And it was interesting as we went through this process, we believe it's really important that a tourism planning initiative can't just be the community, or sorry, can't just be the industry talking to itself. That you really have to engage not only the tourism industry and its stakeholders, but civic government and its stakeholders around that, and the local community. And I'll give you an example of why that's important is that when we did a survey of both the industry as part of this process and the local community, we had more than 2,000 local communities members participated in the process, and the power of out of this survey, they identified the same top 2 key issues for tourism as the tourism industry, and there were neither of these were on our top 10 list when we started the process, but both the industry and the local community identified the same top key issues. One was late night transportation, and the second was liquor laws and regulations, which have since been dramatically amended by the province, who has power over that. But the long and short of it is that it was very powerful to be able to go in front of city leaders and provincial government and say, not only does the tourism industry think these are key issues for our future, so does the local community, and to see that alignment between community and industry. So I think the key takeaway there as you work on and think about any planning process within your destination, that you're including and engaging the local community as part of the process. So as we move from assessment into planning, you remember that UNWTO definition about how important it is to partner, that destinations or developers, you really don't have the means to affect all of these different areas in terms of implementation. So a lot of your success in terms of destination management is going to be determined by the strength and partnerships that you build. This is a city that we've been working with. It's Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is the Guthrie Green, a great park public space. And this is an example where the DMO, the destination, understands the value of improving quality of place, not because it's going to have an immediate impact on room nights, but it's going to improve the quality of the experience. So the destination is working on things like getting a new arena built, and now working on an arena district master plan for the whole area, now that this BOK Center, one of the highest rated arena entertainment venues actually in the United States, and they're now looking at how do we leverage that and create a plan for the entire district, and the DMO is helping to lead that charge with the city. They've also just attracted BMX USA to move their headquarters there to Tulsa from Phoenix and build a new facility, and they're now working and have helped promote and advance with the city a new $400 million park that's going to open next year, which is pretty staggering in terms of thinking about the experience. And this is an example that will have benefits not just to the DMO, but primarily to quality of life for local residents. So this particular DMO, Visit Tulsa, is working with and helping spearhead leadership around all of these different projects because it sees the value it has for the destination as a whole long term. The next, as you move from assess to plan to partner, is around organizing and committing to fund management resources to guide the implementation. Creating a plan for the sake of having a plan but not having any resources to manage and implement it over time is really a wasted effort. These are just some of the titles around destination management that organizations have that we've seen. Chief Experience Officer, Vice President Destination Development, Vice President Community Affairs, This was an interesting one that Tourism Vancouver had, that was a tourism energy specialist, somebody that just worked with hotels to help them reduce energy consumption. When I put this slide up in Poland at the European Cities Future of DMO Summit, and I asked how many people in the room who represented more than 50 different cities and destinations Europe had anybody with these titles in their organization, not a single person raised their hand. And I think that was a kind of a collective wake-up call that destinations realized how much work they had to do to be moving into the destination management space. An organization that we think is doing a great job in this area is Travel Portland. Travel Portland has a vice president of community affairs. They're building a destination development department. They're working closely with Airbnb. They're bringing all of these people to the table and into their organization. The next big piece then is actually the development. And when you think about destination development, we really divide that into three areas. There's product development, there's programming development, and there's place development. And this is all about creating experiences for visitors that ideally also enhance or improve quality of life for local residents. So when it comes to product development, there are big institutions or attractions. These are big high-ticket items. This is the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. Major effect, you can look at this little chart of foreign visitors to Bilbao and the surrounding province before the Guggenheim Museum opened, and the effect that had afterwards. Product development doesn't just have to be built attractions or museums in the way we think about it. It can also be community parks. This is the High Line, which was an abandoned elevated railway on the west side of Manhattan, converted into a public park system that runs for a couple of miles along the west side. They originally anticipated that they would get around 800,000 visits a year to this public park, and they've already eclipsed now receiving more than 4 million visitors a year, the majority of those being visitors, not just local residents. So this public park and quality of life enhancing amenity for local residents has turned into an attraction for visitors as well. So that's product. Then you think about if product is the hardware of a destination, programming is the software. And that's made up of events, festivals, experiences, culture that people can experience. This is the C2 conference in Montreal, where I am today. I attended this conference earlier. C2 stands for Creativity and Commerce. They get about 6,000 people a year attend this very innovative event and festival. So it's not just an experience, it's also helping to shape and brand the identity of Montreal as a creative and innovative place to do business as well. I was just in Tel Aviv earlier last month, and they have an innovation festival. Again, another kind of an example of programming that's attracting people, business, visitors to the city that they've created, but it's also helping shape the identity of the city from a business perspective as well. So I think product and programming are fairly well understood. I think what's not so well understood is placemaking. And this is the idea about developing place within your city or destination. And I think this is particularly relevant whether you're a developer, whether you're running a business improvement association or business improvement district, or you're a destination marketing organization, that we can all be working on trying to create this is how MIT defines spaces that spark public discourse, create beauty and delight, engender civic pride, connect neighborhoods, support community health and safety, grow social justice, catalyze economic development, and nurture an authentic sense of place. So, I mean, that sounds like placemaking will do just about everything other than cure cancer. But here's the real simple example of placemaking. This is actually behind our office in Vancouver, and this was actually done not by the Destination Marketing Organization, but by the Downtown Business Association, who created a design, and with $200,000, they created what they call Awesome Alley, and this alley became a space for different events and activities in what would have been during the day is only used for trash pickup. And what's interesting about this particular alley is I walk by here every day when I'm in Vancouver on my way to the office, and you will always see 5, 6, 7 people, couples, individuals, taking pictures, and guess what they're doing with those pictures? They're likely posting them on Instagram, Facebook. So here's a place that we've created. So now this placemaking is turning into place marketing. And what's the value of that $200,000 of paint? Not just in terms of creating a better space for the local community to have events, but it's attracting visitors who come to check it out and share photos of themselves in this space on Instagram. Here's another example in Montreal. Here's an example. I was just in Jerusalem, and we've seen this whole umbrella project spread from Portugal, where it started, to many different cities in Europe. So these create experiences not just for the local community, but they create these Instagrammable opportunities that become a marketing vehicle in and of itself. And I was with Ethan Kent from Project for Public Spaces. We were both speaking at the Institute for Place Management Biennial Conference in Manchester a few weeks ago, and he had this quote. I thought he said it was interesting. He said, "A placemaking approach to tourism development can not only help ensure economic success, but also manage impact and build local capacity for continuing to manage, maintain, and evolve the destination." So I think as whether you're a DMO or, as I mentioned, a business improvement association, or even if you're a developer on large projects, that these are easy wins. Building a new arena, creating a new museum, those are long-term projects that are still worthwhile. But there are so many much more low-hanging fruit for us to pick in terms of placemaking and looking at how we might take underutilized spaces within destinations and turn them into opportunities for events, experiences that can be shared on social media and marketing. So as you move from development, then it comes to managing that guest experience throughout the destination, not just within the visitor center. And I think some good examples of that are our friends at Wonderful Copenhagen, of what seems like a very simple innovation, but incredibly difficult to pull together, is creating one card that allows you as a visitor to purchase for a day, multiple days, a week, that allows you to access 79 different museums and attractions, take the train, take the bus throughout the entire metropolitan area, all with swiping a single card. So I think that's an example of enhancing the guest experience. That's destination management. And then destination management is also thinking about how do you interact and manage the guests, not just after they've left the destination, but monitoring them while they're on social media channels, posting, sharing ratings, reviews, and amplifying those or responding to them if they're having a negative experience. And I think one of the best organizations is Tourism Australia, is an example of that, how they interact with their fans, their guests, and their visitors while they're within the destination. And the last, this really comes full circle back to the assessment process of continuing to monitor the experiential quality of a destination to identify areas of competitive advantage that you should be exploiting from a marketing perspective, and monitoring and identifying potential deficiencies that you need to work on from a destination development and management perspective. One of the examples of that is the Bermuda Tourism Authority. We've been working with them over the last couple of years, and they asked us not just to do an initial destination assessment using our methodology, but to actually monitor the experiential quality of Bermuda against their competitive set. And I think that's important to note, that all of the overall rankings that I showed you are interesting. What's more interesting, and where the real insight comes from, is when we benchmark a city or region or resort against its specific competitive set to identify key areas of competitive advantages and weaknesses. And we do that for Bermuda, and it's been interesting to see how dynamic the data actually is from one assessment to another, where we see actual movements up and down that we're able to report on, that allows them from a destination management perspective to address some of the deficiencies or areas that maybe they're seeing declines in, or perhaps there are gaps that they think are important to their positioning, which hopefully this is reporting on, that this is an ad put together by their agency, our friends at MMGY, that hopefully the data that we're seeing reflects the marketing message that they're putting out into the marketplace. So this really summarizes this path to what we believe how DMOs should think about becoming DMMOs and being both a destination marketing and management organization. So just to kind of recap and conclude, and if you get some questions, please submit those in. Here we can see this idea about meaning of a life for a DMO. Tourism continues to grow. DMOs have to shift some of their resources from marketing. If you're riding this rising tide and you're seeing growth in inbound visitors, that your resources shouldn't all just be focused on marketing, that you should be starting to look at how do you shift some of those to management. Next is that, as locals and visitors and digital channels become the primary means of place-based communications, that we start to think about, and many DMOs are already doing this, but shifting from traditional marketing, not just to using social media as a marketing channel, but shifting to destination management create the experiences and the places and the opportunities for visitors and locals to promote their destination by the experiences and the opportunities you create. To next and lastly, again, this hypothesis or point that we believe that perhaps destination marketing organizations are really the only organization within a city or a region or a county structure that has the capabilities, capacities, and fundings to focus on developing and managing the experiential quality of a city. So just to recap again, this is the services that we focus on, and of course about how we might be able to help with some of these various aspects. So I'm just going through some of the questions and a few different comments, and sorry, somebody asked if we could go back to the millennial slide, so I'm not sure which ones to say, but one question here was about what would you say are the implications to non-urban and remote destinations or Aboriginal cultures and how to help them in their marketing and management. I think that, so there are many destinations that don't have a over-tourism problem, and many of us are still in the business of trying to attract people to our destination. And I think some of the takeaways for destinations like that is that it is around how do you create experiences, place-making opportunities, and thinking about what are you creating that is Instagrammable, is Twitter, that can be shared on Twitter or Facebook, that creating the opportunities for those shared media moments is really key to marketing, not just in destinations that have many people, but those are lessons that can be applied in smaller destinations as well. And I think there's also the opportunity to really use some of the same methodology and approach to understanding, well, what are some of the key, as you drill down into the data, experiential or differences about your cultural experience versus one in another destination. I don't see any other questions. If somebody else has a question, please feel free to pop it in. I think a few people had some technical difficulties over the course of the webinar, but I'm glad that this one went much better than our last attempt. Again, if you'd like to learn more about resonance and how we might be able to help your destination or development, please feel free to reach out to me at cfair@resonanceco.com or visit our website at www.resonanceco.com. And you can also follow us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @resonanceco, and my personal Twitter is @crfair. So thanks again for joining us. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you in the weeks and months to come about how to make all of our cities and communities vibrant places to visit and hopefully to live as well. Thank you.